All right, so we're going to start on number 10. Up to 10, I can draw and label the continental margins. Remember, continental means that we're going to be talking about granite, the rock granite, not basalt, which is in the oceanic crust. Basically, we're going to draw the profile, which you have this diagram in front of you, and we're going to label the shelf, the break, the slope, the rise, and the abyssal plains. We'll be basing our labeling off of this diagram, which is in your textbook on page 37. All right, so let's get started. The first thing that you need to, I would like for you to draw, if you can, get my blue out, is blue, is the water level. Because we want to make sure that we understand that this is where the water level is going to come and everything else is underneath the water. This right here is what we call the shelf. Okay. The shelf is going to be different depending on the coast that you're on. The Pacific coast is a very short shelf. We have a very, very long shelf. In class, we'll be looking at Google Earth to kind of compare and contrast the length of those shelves, and we'll talk a little bit about government and how the shelves go into that. And we'll also talk about wave height. This is the shelf break. This is going to be the slope. And again, the slope we're going to compare and contrast with in between active and passive margins as well. So we'll look at California's slope versus ours. We'll put that together with the shelf to try to figure out, why do they have bigger waves than us, and what does it mean to be an active margin? But since we live on a passive margin, we are going to draw a little bit of accumulation right here, and we're going to call this the rise. We're not going to see these on active margins, so we're going to draw what we have because we live on a passive margin. And finally, we have the abyssal plains, which is nothing. It's flat in areas, but it has a lot of topography, and that's something that we're going to stress in this unit. All right, for number 11, we are going to compare active and passive margins. And so what you're looking at is actually South America, but it's the same on North America. So we can kind of look at the comparison of California to our coast, or here you can look at the Pacific Ocean of the side of the South America to the east side of South America. And so what we're looking at here is the difference between a couple of the structures that we just labeled earlier in the video. Active means that you're going to have a subduction zone. That means that the basalt is going to be going underneath the continental crust, which is right here. So this is going to be granite, this is going to be basalt, and that means that it's actively moving. Over here, one of the differences is that you don't have that movement in the basalt, and so what happens is you start to have an accumulation of the sediment that goes down the slope, which is the continental rise. So that's one of the big differences, is that the passive side is going to have a rise, whereas the active is not. The second thing that we're going to talk about is the shelf. In active margin, you have a very, very little small shelf, and passive, you're very wide, and it's gradual, it's more shallow. And so you're going to have a shallow and gradual shelf. Whereas on active, you're going to have a little shelf. And when we look at Google Earth, we're going to see that significantly. That's something that's really pointed out when we look at Google Earth. The second thing I want you to look at over here is going to be the slope. Active margins have a very, very, very steep slope. Whereas if you look over here on passive, it's not as steep and it's more of a gradual. So over here in active, you're going to have a steeper slope. Okay. So let's talk about this. Active margin is active. So, you're going to have tectonic plate movement. And so when you have that, you're constantly, any sediment that would go down a slope is getting pushed down in the subduction zone right here. Because remember, it's creating a trench, which we learned in earlier objectives. So on active margins, you're going to have trenches, where on passives, you're not, where you're going to have a rise. So we go to the next question. It says, relate this to wave height. When you look at over here on the passive margin is very, very, very wide shelf and gradual. If you know anything about movement and friction, that's a lot of surface area for the water molecules to catch on and cause a lot of friction, which is going to slow them down. So on passive margins, you have increased friction due to the long shelf, and that equals slower and lower waves. On active margins, you're going to have less friction, which is going to give you higher and faster waves. So if you compare surfing on our west coast and surfing on our east coast, it's a significant difference. If you call yourself a surfer on the east coast, really you're a boogie boarder. So on the California coast, you're going to have those higher waves with higher crests. All right, so we said the abyssal plains are not flat at all. And if you look at this picture here, you can see that, here's the shelf, here's the slope. But look here, you can have volcanoes, you can have trenches. We're going to talk about the mid-oceanic ridge. You are going to have some plains. But the two words that are new to us are seamount and what a guyot is. Seamount is exactly what it sounds like. It's a mountain underneath the water. So let me get my pen ready for you. So a seamount is an underwater volcano, and sometimes they can surface and be islands, okay, such as Iceland and Hawaii. Guyots are flat-topped seamounts. So let's write that down first, and then we're going to add some more things. So they're flat-topped, seamounts. So if we look at the, in terms of evolution and, aging of rock, seamounts are generally younger because it's usually an active volcano and it's constantly growing. Guyots are obviously older because they've dealt with erosion from wave action and over time, which has made them flat. So these guys are older, whereas these guys are younger. Okay, and just make sure that you can notice, I don't know, in your black and white photo that you have in front of you, you can tell that the seamount has actually broke the water line and is an island, whereas the Guyots underneath and is a flat top.